Hello again. Today I'm going to be trying something a little different for the structure of this video and how it's presented, but I hope you like it. It's going to cover and elaborate on some of the issues I've been seeing with content online, specifically that of the exaggeration of how groups behave or how they are perceived to behave as a result of how they're represented by content posted online about them. This next part of the video is a preface to the greater point I want to make in the video, but is necessary to wrap the whole of what I say into one cohesive story or narrative. So it seems to be that in any movement or group, there are a select few individuals that innovate ideas, push them forward, and generally are the effective advocates for the group itself. If we were to examine their productivity, it far and away exceeds that of most other members, which is in line with various principles documenting this phenomena, of a minority being the productive bunch and the majority being relatively unproductive, or at the very least not as impactful or useful, you could say. No. Productive, you could say. This is a rudimentary definition of something called the Pareto principle, which I would then relate to or apply on how I believe a group would end up being perceived by others observing it, which I think always ends up being through the lens of this 20% who does everything in the name of the group, or who serves as a de facto representative of it. Functionally, their absence would be the death of the group, and so I believe that they eventually start to represent the group in its entirety and become its public face, especially on the internet, with the way groups are perceived there. When these productive minorities work and act towards the group's interests, the group benefits. Its public image becomes more respected, and generally, it seems the group benefits from its public perception. People really have favorable outlooks on them. An example of this I would give would actually be the Jewish culture. Now, I know there's a cohort of people online who really would not subscribe to this belief, but it seems through their various principles and cultural norms that I have observed, they've cemented themselves as like a powerhouse in terms of productivity and wealth, the both of which they seem to be in abundance of, despite some of, the perceptions of them. Right? I think it's very cultural, the reason that community has done well. And I don't think there is much biology behind people doing well and people doing poorly. I think a lot of it is the nurture element of nature versus nurture. Anyhow, it is when these pseudo-representatives of groups work against their own interests and subsequently the group interest that a problem is formed. Their actions will reflect badly on them and the various groups they are a part of. The more niche the group is, the more impactful all of these negative actions are on how the group's perception is in the cultural space, because each member makes up a bigger proportion of the groups than in groups of greater size. Mind you, throughout all of this, many people don't expressly choose to become a representative of their group. For some, it happens without their knowledge and doesn't give them a chance to evaluate their actions with that in mind. All the same, they represent the groups they are a part of, which is why I found that many such organizations and congregations of people are very keen on disavowing former members when they do act out of line, out of self-interest to maintain their image and public standing, because they know just how bad it is to have people immediately assuming negative of you and of the groups you are a part of. It's very toxic. It's like a ball and chain on the progress that they make. It's an unnecessary hurdle. Where I think there is an increase in the harm this effect can cause, however, is in the introduction of social networks into the equation. Now, not only is the individual's actions poorly reflective of, or at least we hope it is, poorly reflective of the group in the context of people who observe it, or its effects directly, they are now broadcasted for all to see online, in whatever proportion the respective platform supports. Now, as you may know, this comes with its own set of problems, the one I've found to be the biggest concern being the amplification of these kinds of extreme representations of groups and their members because of people doing stupid things and and then it just keeps getting signal boosted up until the point where it is expected of them to be doing stupid shit. This kind of content paints an otherwise inaccurate picture of groups and their members. What ends up being represented is at the very most an exaggerated image of the group and the people within. And given the internet's nature of signal boosting negative and inflammatory reactionary content, I think it is very obvious the kinds of shenanigans that will be gotten up to with these games of representation. Now, repetition of a portrayal in general is where I believe something like stereotyping originates, and where I may hold a controversial opinion on the matter is where I do think that because this stereotyping is a result of portrayals, experiences, and essentially representations, there lies an element of truth in the matter, in the stereotype. Because, for a stereotype, I believe, to manifest itself, it first has to prove its own validity through the actions of the people who it describes. They have to act for it to become expected of them. They have to act in that manner. So for a relevant example, a stereotype for someone like me who is of Indian descent would be that we smell bad. Now, while I don't believe it to be entirely accurate, to paint everyone with the same brush, that's stupid, it suffices to say that the stereotype exists for a reason. Perhaps immigrants or the like failed to take care of their body odor for so long that those around them started to assume that they would smell badly regardless. This perception bled its way into many Western perspectives on Indians, and to the point where it is now a stereotype that Indians tend to smell bad. It's even the tech support scammers, the Indian call centers. It is a stereotype for a good reason, because there are many call centers there. That's where a lot of them make their livings, is scamming old white people. I really don't think it to be racist to point out something that is very obviously something this community has been doing. Where I do think perhaps you could be racist, kinda, is in expecting all of them to act in that manner, because it is clear not everyone will be fresh off the boat, stinky, be eating curry in front of you, and running a call center while you're talking or something, and to expect something other than what they are because of their skin color. I think that's where it gets into strange territories. Now, what I want to reiterate is that while these understandings may not be representative of all members of the group, they find their origins in some aspect of reality. I do believe people have to have acted out a stereotype enough for it to become the dominant assumption of them. And this, I believe, is what is so insidious about the perception of a minority on the internet. Enough exposure to what may or may not be accurate of the group will tend to start warping perceptions to the point where these behaviors become expected of them. All of this is to preface and contextualize me eventually circling back to Twitter in this whole matter. I know, we love talking about Twitter here. From my observations, its algorithm is one of the most egregious examples of this kind of content, the type I would call misrepresentative content, being pushed forward. Even on the political end, I see both the left and right creating false narratives and gross exaggerations of the other side to rally against, and in doing so they radicalize themselves against their supposed opponents, effectively rendering most of what they say to be unintelligible and weird to the uninitiated. There are literally meme accounts present that just all they do is parody what these, I don't want to say crazy people, but these very misinformed people produce, because it looks like satire. It reads like satire just from the get-go. The left mocking right and the right mocking left content is all produced under the guise of mocking and what I think at least is an ephemeral and largely unrealistic image of their supposed opponents. Part of what makes humans so susceptible to the shit-flinging, I find, is our negativity bias, or bias towards negative content and experiences, but I won't elaborate further on this. There's a YouTuber, Chris Williams, and he's a podcaster. He's elaborated much on that, I think, in a podcast before. You check him out if you are interested. I found we create characters of who we detest and disagree with to more effectively separate ourselves from them. This makes it easier to dehumanize them and otherwise dismiss their ideas, because in order to do so in the first place, your fellow man cannot be as you are. For if they were, you would come to understand how and why they came to the conclusions they did. And understanding, I find, is one of the barriers that restricts outright hate. You really can't hate someone or an idea they produce if you thoroughly understand how they got to the conclusion they did. I would argue this understanding requires knowledge that, had you been in the same position, you might have at least considered their conclusion. To hate or detest someone based off of the conclusion they have drawn after you yourself recognize that you could have gotten to the same conclusion is in essence to hate yourself, with a part of yourself that is similar to them in how it could reason with that. It could reason to that conclusion. I do believe hate and resentment, a lot of what we're seeing online, because it is a breeding ground for this as I keep iterating, is born from a lack or unwillingness to understand or to get into the mind of the people you don't understand or disagree with, because I think disagreeing is not understanding. It's just a matter after that of weighing two separate solutions to problems, right? And from that, then there's a disagreement or some value judgment that one is better than or more effective than the other. As is the case, though, trying to convey this over the internet through its many means proves to be a very difficult task, considering the resistance a minority on the internet would have to the idea of trying to understand someone that is their supposed opponent rather than outright bashing them for being what they are. It would perhaps be a more apt description to use the term extremist rather than internet minority, for this type of person I believe has ruined internet discourse at the hands of how they were radicalized, whether it be through not wholly accurate depictions and the conclusions that follow, because of course we're gonna graph our own trend lines in our head. Okay, these people do this because of what I've seen. Have you seen it in person? If you've seen it in person, maybe there's some validity. Does it apply across all domains? Maybe not. Maybe it's never set in stone, right? But whatever. So the trend lines we graph and the subsequent actions that are taken on their behalf, a lack of understanding of one's own worldview, or an unwillingness to really dig deep into other perspectives, all of which are contributing to this mash of radical and otherwise sometimes even contradictory ideas that become very hard to attack because they're attempting to be glued together or stay together almost. It just doesn't, and it becomes resistant to attack. These kinds of people at least become hard to reason with and expose new ideas to, because many of the core beliefs they hold are shaky and unthought through. They're very surface level, or even naive, I would say. I think some are fed a narrative and stick to it, while others haphazardly stack unstable or, again, very surface level ideas upon one another to form a cohesive story with which they base their beliefs and subsequent actions that follow the underlying belief system. Nonetheless, with extreme ideologies, I've found they alienate themselves from regular discourse, with many of the predefined assumptions that need to be made for their assumptions to work. For the Twitter communist, for instance, I've found it tends to be that they view many types of labor as inherently exploitative, and that most, if not all, forms of human interactions are games of power and manipulation, rather than I think, equally valid explanation to many, maybe not all, of being cooperation and mutual benefit. This then alienates the person replying to the tweet or Instagram post about reaping excess value, who otherwise think that the employee-employer relationship is not built on abuse so much as it is built on mutual cooperation. They work and are paid in return, usually in accordance or somewhere close to in accordance with their value to the market. For the Twitter rightoid, I've found their takes are predicated on extreme personal responsibility rather than societal change, alongside some more extreme ideas I feel are not worth delving into at the moment, if you get what I mean. These, then, in turn, tend to alienate those who believe their ability to self-actualize has been hindered or otherwise been afflicted by their environment. I think there's two sides to every one of these coins, and the discussion of some seems to be more heavily scrutinized than the discussion of others. This is not good for discourse. And thus, this asks the question, what is to be done? It's clear to see that much of the internet is a breeding ground for an increasingly large cohort of people who believe nonsensical things, but given its necessity for much of the Western world, it's here to stay. We can't just abandon it, it's here to stay until the next thing shows up and replaces its role, especially considering how much of a powerhouse it turned out to be for shaping Western culture. We saw its effects front and center with the 2016 election in America and how big a role it played in campaigning and whatever nonsense they got up to for both sides. It's very interwoven with many of our systems, and suppose we had a worldwide internet blackout, a lot of infrastructure would be completely ruined for the next couple years, and people would have to rebuild a lot because we have effectively dumped all of the handiwork onto the internet because of how convenient it has made much of labor. The result still has to play itself out. From what I've seen and come to personally, as has been the case, what will solve the issue of increasingly radical and nonsensical people is again discourse, in this case with an open mind. Closed mind discourse is only allowing people to effectively bounce ideas off of people who share beliefs, as they would be more receptive to the ideas shared if they are similar to one's own. This is in real time creating echo chamber-like effects because no one on the supposed opposite side is willing to engage with the ideas of their supposed enemy. If we are not willing as people to contest ideas and figure out which of the bunch is the most effective, we will only continue seeing a great divide between people who hold this view or that, rather than the cohort I think best of people who are around the middle who can weigh in the pros and cons of each perspective. We already see the consequences in America, namely, the gross political division and hatred between their two primary political parties, and the subsequent alienation from one another that it's causing. I mean, you have people from either side not even letting their children get married to, political beliefs are a thing to be selecting your future partner now. It's completely inane. This cannot continue. It is clearly not working, and will only hinder us as a species. We are better off figuring out what ideas work and what don't through discussion and debate. I am tired of leaving people be with shitty ideas and beliefs that aren't working because they haven't. I would advise the same for you, the viewer who has stayed this long. I appreciate your view. Even something as small as discussing disagreements within your friend group, I think will ameliorate the condition. Because as has always been the case, large changes are produced from repetitive occurrences of smaller ones. With that being said, that should be all. Thank you for watching through the entirety of this mishmash of jumbled ideas, and comment down below. I'll read it. I'll respond. Tell me what you thought of this new format, because I'm trying out new things. Thank you for watching.